Hello and welcome to Procurement Uncut, brought to you by BizClick and our sponsors for this series, Amazon Business. This is your go-to podcast for all things procurement. If you're ready to move from being a tactical buyer to a strategic leader, you're in the right place. Tune in and together we can build a better bottom line. Hello and welcome back to the Procurement Magazine podcast. I am your host and senior editor of Procurement Magazine and Supply Chain Digital, Aaron McMillan. Our guest today is a visionary leader who views procurement not just as a cost center, but as a massive engine for organizational transformation, human connection, and planetary good. He is currently the Chief Procurement Officer at Al-Futtaim Group. Before taking the helm there, he led global procurement transformations at massive multinational giants like Novartis and Unilever. He actually started his foundation in the travel and aviation sectors with TUI and Britannia Airways, anchored heavily by a deep background in information technology. Please welcome to the Procurement Magazine podcast, Chris Bullock. Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, how are you?
Yes, I'm not too bad. Thanks. How are you today?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Very good. So really looking forward to our conversation today. I always just like to start these off by just tell me a little bit about how you got into working in the world of procurement. Was it a dream of yours growing up, or just like so many of your peers, did you fall into the sector?
Yeah, I'm still wondering how I got into it actually. So that's a good question to start with. Now, honestly, I think procurement found me rather than the other way around. I think I started out in a boutique agency, and it was procurement related. We were delivering supply chain solutions for largely kind of government clients in the UK, simplifying how they classified and managed their supply chains. And kind of that naturally developed for me then into procure to pay world, and implementing those types of systems, as a functional consultant into some large organizations. But from there, and I kind of, I got pulled more and more into commercially focused conversations. And I have to say, the discussions were far more interesting than configuration templates. So before I knew it, I was pretty much hooked in procurement work.
What did you find so interesting about it in those early days that's kept you in the field for so long?
I think and I still find it interesting, it's people, actually. I think, no one person comes into work, in a large organization with their own selfish thoughts in mind. They're all trying to do the best for the organization, but actually their lens could be completely different to everybody else's. And that diversity of kind of thought and process, and even with the external supply base, right? I mean, they come in with a different perspective as well. And that's the bit that I generally find fascinating. I always kind of joke that I'm fundamentally a nosy person, and procurement's a brilliant place if you're genuinely kind of curious about things, because you get to see the whole enterprise end to end, and how it operates. So I think that's for me the kind of special thing about procurement.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. That natural based curiosity will definitely help anyone looking to kind of break in to procurement and to build success with it. And I mean, you talk a lot about the human side there, and I suppose procurement kind of gets labeled as this more kind of almost cold-hearted sector of business, someone who's just responsible for for saving money, for driving the best deals, often saying no. And like mentioned in your intro there, you're kind of someone who strives to have that kind of balance between the brain and the heart. How difficult has it been to kind of strike that balance in a field such as procurement?
Um, I don't think it's been that difficult at all. I think, by the way, the individual that said that was kind of an assessment consultant, and it's still one of the proudest pieces of feedback that I think I've ever received. So I'm happy that you brought you brought it up. But I think I'd like to push back on the premise a little bit. I don't think procurement has ever really been about kind of cold hard data and the bottom line. Again, at its core, it's people. And people will either make a success of an organization, or they'll contribute towards its failure as well. So again, what kind of I find interesting is what drives them, what motivates them, what their unconscious biases are that they bring into decision making, their emotions, etc., etc. And I think our ability to clearly articulate what we want to achieve rather than kind of jumping straight to a conclusion of how we get there is everything. So to me, all of that is fundamentally kind of an EQ centric conversation, right? And when you blend that with data and an understanding of kind of those human behaviors, you don't have to choose between people and results. You collectively drive both.
Yeah, certainly. Like you said, there needs to be that balance. The amount of times I've spoken to leaders on this podcast who talk about needing to understand the people that drive your business and your suppliers, the people you work with. I suppose in that case, if you're obviously an expert in that, so if someone was starting a new supplier partnership tomorrow, what would you kind of say is the most important thing to kind of get out of those first, 10 days, 20 days when you're starting that new relationship so you can, build the foundations to have a successful partnership?
I think it's understanding understanding what the motivations are of the individuals. I think it's easy to assume in these situations, right? You've got a new supplier in front of you. Of course, they want to sell you something, and of course, the individual that's involved, the account manager, whatever their title is, has an intrinsic link to success based on whatever they sell to you. But actually, let's go deeper than that and understand really what the motivations are that drive that individual. So I think it's really about kind of making sure that you understand those issues, also understand and that they understand yours very clearly as well. And I think, to me, negotiation starts on day one when you first meet somebody, right, in a business setting in this environment. So you're both establishing kind of boundaries and understanding how far you can push and how far you can pull, to ultimately get to the right outcome for both. And I think I wouldn't classify myself as a good negotiator by any stretch of the imagination. There's far better people out there than me at that. But I think I'm good at reading individuals and understanding when you push too far. And I think I'm good at showing emotion on my face when people push me too far as well. So, yeah.
So with that, as a lot of emotional intelligence that goes into a role like this, but for some people that doesn't come so naturally. So how would you encourage people to kind of harness those skills? You could be a whiz, you could be the best negotiator in the world, but if you don't have that emotional intelligence, can understand the people behind the deal, like I said, it doesn't come naturally to some people. So how would you kind of start to sharpen that tool in your arsenal?
Yeah. Again, there's very few people in the world that are totally cold-hearted, in my view, right? And I can tell from just speaking to you, and you've got a warm heart, right? So again, I think it's about people's motivations, and I feel like if it's something they're not showing and they're not using, then clearly that's it's a muscle, right? And you have to exercise the muscle and try. So to me, I think EQ really is just about being human and about being authentic. And I've worked on done some wonderful leaders, and not just kind of in the human world, but taking great advice from HR people and finance people. And I dearly remember an HR business partner at a quite upsetting time in my life because of stuff that was happening in my personal life. Just saying, let everybody know, be authentic about it. They'll want to hear it. And I feel like you have to kind of push past that boundary and take the leap of faith to actually kind of expose yourself a little bit and let people know about that. So that would be the advice that I would give to anybody, is just take that leap.
Yeah, I agree. I can relate to that on a personal level. Sharing those kind of the stuff that's troubling you outside of work. It doesn't have to be seen as a sign of weakness. In fact, people will admire you for being able to be open with them and can make
Totally.
yeah make things easier for you in your work life, which, it's all about. If they make those changes for you, you can continue to do the best job possible. And obviously, quite a lot of your leadership is kind of centered on that kind of, the people at the heart of your business, like you've kind of said throughout this conversation so far. It's the people that drives it. You've always kind of you seek to do what's right for people, business, and the planet. But quite often, I imagine those kind of three elements come into conflict with one another. How do you never navigate that when the tension starts to arrive between the three?
So yeah, it's a great question. I mean, again, I was lucky enough to work alongside some genuinely visionary leaders in this space, particularly when I was at Unilever. Right, the whole sustainable living plan at Unilever kind of set out, that we were going to be a sustainable first company. But I can remember distinctly being told, there is no compromise between the three. And I kind of still agree with that, right? I mean, yes, pragmatism tells you that there has to be some compromise, but actually, why should you pay more for doing the right thing? Really? I mean, at its fundamental level. So I think you've got to keep that. You've got to keep kind of that as a core value, which, again, which luckily, with the right guidance, the right leadership, I had that and I've kept that. There is a pragmatism level. I don't think you can ignore that, but I do feel like you have to take things on a case by case basis. I think you can never assume that one size fits all, and the art really is kind of reading each situation and finding the path to one or all three of them, quite frankly. So, business, people, and planet. So, yeah.
I really like that you said that there's no compromise, and why should there be a penalty for having to pay more, why should there be a penalty for doing the right thing? And I completely agree. But so often not, people will look to get the best deal and maybe not mind about kind of who gets hurt or what suffers in relation to that. So I suppose it's how we can kind of continue to be ambassadors for that decision that business can be successful and we can carry on doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in procurement a long time, and I can remember, when I first started in procurement, there was a lot of talk around, always make sure that you beat the competitor, etc., etc. And again, to a certain extent, that's correct, right? Particularly kind of in the direct material side, I think that's you want to be buying at a lower cost than your competitors, naturally. But actually, so much of procurement is actually about collaboration, right? And there doesn't need to be this competitive tension between us and our business competitors out there. There needs to be actually more collaboration in that space. And I think the more we collaborate, the better it should be for the planet, actually.
Yeah, that collaboration, like I mentioned, is absolutely vital. Would you describe yourself as a competitive person? Sometimes I speak to people on this podcast and they said that they're driven by a competitive nature within them. Speaking to you, you don't give that impression, but I could be very wrong.
I am competitive. My wife will certainly tell you that I'm competitive. That's another story entirely. I am competitive. I feel like I drive myself, right? I think it feel like actually fundamentally I feel like I could be a little bit insecure about the way that I do things. Therefore, it pushes me to do things better continuously and to try and strive to improve. And then again, going back to kind of the curious word, that's one of the things that helps me, quite frankly. But sometimes I can sit here and, like on this podcast, right, a little bit of imposter syndrome, and that's kind of at the heart of me, what drives me forward further. So.
This podcast is in partnership with Amazon Business. Amazon Business is your one-stop destination for everything your organization needs. Think of it as the Amazon you already know and love, but specifically re-engineered for the way you work. Amazon Business gives you access to business-only pricing on millions of items and quantity discounts that scale with your growth. It's about spending less time bogged down in those manual tasks and more time on what really matters. So head over to Amazon Business and make the power of Amazon work for you.
I mean, it's remarkable that you said that you kind of suffer with imposter syndrome, kind of given the career that you've had, the success and the achievements you've had, which are seen in black and white. How do you kind of tackle that? Because from the outside looking in, people would think you're one of those procurement leaders who have made it and are someone to look up to, inspire to be like.
I think the answer is, and I can tell you a story from a long time back. Still a good friend of mine. We were both kind of junior analysts, and we were doing this large stock taking piece of work. And he was working on Excel, and I was looking over his shoulder and getting impatient with the way that he was doing things. So I pointed out that he could do particular functions in Excel in a different way, to which he turned around and showed me that he could do it 30 different ways, none of which I knew about. And in that moment in time, I knew that I'd never, ever be as good at him as Excel. So I decided I'd better find out what I was better at. I was better in communication, actually. So I think that's kind of stayed with me all the way through is, I'm never going to be as good at as certain people at certain things, but actually I do have some superpowers myself. So
that goes back to that kind of idea of, like I said at the top, you're well known for building those teams that drive success. How to, the skills that you possess and what you lack in, and it's, looking for people to help. I suppose it seems to me that you're not someone who's kind of embarrassed at all to ask for help or support from your teams. Perhaps people maybe struggle with that and tend to suffer in silence. How would you encourage people to maybe get over that side of work, collaborating, not to see the skills you don't possess as a weakness, but rather to highlight your strengths and lean on your team when you need that support?
I think if you want to progress, and I think this is the crux of the matter, if you want to progress, you don't do that on your own. Right? You have to work with great people that drive you. And I feel like if you to anybody that's out there that feels like they're struggling, think about what your future career looks like. And if you have ambition, the only way you get there is to actually ask for help in doing it.
I'd be really interested to ask you about your thoughts towards AI and perhaps dealing or handling a team's emotions with something like that. You hear a lot of the workforce talking about the anxiety that comes from the introduction of AI and the fear that this technology is going to take their jobs. Is this something that you're seeing, and if so, how are you kind of helping to quell those anxious conversations?
I need to be careful how I put this. I was going to say in the early days of AI, I think the early days of AI were 1950s or something, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking perhaps 2 years ago, right? I think that there was a fear that actually, and there was a lot of sound bites, right? There was a lot of sound bites on kind of social media about, agents would actually take over pretty much every job you could possibly imagine, and nobody's safe from kind of doctors to architects, etc., etc. And then I think the reality kind of dawned on people that actually, a lot of AI is really about enhancing how humans behave and how humans work. And I think that's where we are. So talking to people, I think, has been really important about understanding kind of their fears, but also fears alone are not good enough, right? You have to take action, and this is the thing that we've been trying to do with people. So, right from the get-go, we started introducing training that's enabled by AI. So if we do a negotiation training course, if we do a category management course, it's always with AI blended to enable people to start actually using this. And once you actually use the tools, then you start overcoming the fears about using them. Right? So I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, it is a really good approach. I think there is a lot of fear in perhaps the unknown. You read headlines and see what's going on around the world. You just assume that kind of stuff is going to happen to you as well. But it's interesting that you're starting to blend it in and, a lot of people say that the technology is there to enhance the people within your team rather than replace them. Just wondering, what do you think are the most important kind of human-based skills that you think AI can never replace?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, we've talked about EQ an awful lot, right? So, fundamentally, we've just spent an awful lot of time as a team actually working on this, and specifically asking ourselves, what does the future operating model of procurement look like in an AI agentic world? And our conclusion was quite straightforward, actually. So, once we kind of framed it in that way, you said that the activities that require genuine EQ and IQ, things like relationship management, navigating conflict, building trust, reading the room, give those to humans. Everything else an agent can do and manage. And they can do it 24 hours a day, and they can probably do it with more accuracy and dedication than the humans can. So that's kind of the way that we started building our operating model moving forward. So yeah,
I think it's something that
sorry, just to interrupt. I think the only caveat and the only fear that I actually have on that is that there does need to be a breeding ground for the next generation of procurement leaders. So I certainly know that I got to where I got to off the back of some great people, but also by making mistakes and learning from them. And I want my team to be able to have the same privilege, actually. And to do that, you have to be in the field. You have to roll your sleeves up. You have to kind of understand the categories and the suppliers and how operations work and how good governance work. So we need to make sure that we create that space. Otherwise, AI will just take that level of intelligence away, and people would be kind of fumbling around in the dark, basically.
Do you fear that all those roles are going to disappear?
I do, actually. I feel like it's one of the things I say to the team. And, I find a lot of people, and maybe it's a little bit cultural as well, but I find a lot of people saying, if I ask in an interview, what do you most like about procurement? And people say to me, negotiation, I really worry, right? Because actually the machines can kind of negotiate better than humans can, right? So I feel like there are certain elements of the role which are likely to disappear. Does that mean that humans don't need to understand them any longer? Absolutely not. So we still need that kind of end-to-end knowledge. But I do feel like some of the more manual tasks that perhaps we're not so good at, actually. And things like classifying spend types and things like that. Traditionally, organizations have been awful at that. And that's humans that should be doing it. So let's let the machines do that stuff, right? And get higher levels of accuracy as a result of it.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that, people say in an interview that negotiation is their favorite part of the job. Obviously, it makes sense given that, maybe that's what you feel. Maybe new professionals feel that that's what they're there to do. They're there to negotiate the best deal and kind of win the day for the team. Do you think that's right?
Well, I mean, again, it's natural, right? Negotiations apart, even if you're kind of only dealing with internal relationships or something, you're still negotiating with people. So it's a core skill, but it's not the only skill. And as I say, if it's kind of a pure play piece around, providing logical arguments why a supplier should give you goods and services at a lower cost or at a higher service level or a better quality or whatever it might be, I feel like machines are much more persistent than humans might be on that one. I always remember, kind of going on negotiation training course by saying that, children are the best negotiators because they never let go. They are, they're always constantly saying, why? And a machine will do that for you as well. So at the end of the day, I feel like, again, it's about finding the human superpowers rather than worrying about the things that we're not.
Yeah, absolutely.
or don't need to be as good at.
Absolutely. I do like the idea of two global 2000 companies walking into a boardroom and both having two sets of children on either side negotiating the deal. Maybe there'll be some success there. Maybe someone will pilot that idea.
Essentially, or you'd never close the deal because they just carry on forever.
Oh. And to flip that from, from the team that you're leading to actually being a leader yourself, you're working at a time of such volatility, and business performance in an environment like this is just shifting unpredictably. What do you think, what can a leader do to keep the team calm and focused during these times of such volatility?
Well, these times of volatility, I think seems like it's been going on forever, actually. So I think we need to start by accepting that nobody business expects a predictable environment anymore. I mean, I think it was 2011 where I first heard the term VUCA, and I don't think it's changed ever, since those almost days are genuinely over. So the question isn't how do you protect your team from uncertainty, it's how you lead them through it, right? And for me, that starts again with authenticity, being honest and transparent with people about the challenges that the environment is throwing at the business. I think not pretending to have all the answers and being kind of authentic and honest with people, and being clear about how we collectively try to navigate, right? You can't fight these battles alone. So you do need your team to kind of genuinely focus on what you collectively feel is the North Star, even whilst everything around you is shifted. And, sat here in Dubai, and there's a great example that's unfurling at this moment in time where we're having major issues with supply chains and bringing product into the country. And people are really standing up. It's a pleasure to be. This sounds weird, but it is actually a pleasure to kind of see it in real time, right? The actual fortitude of people to kind of navigate through the uncertainty and still try and be the best for the organization.
Yeah, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that, because we hear about the uncertainty and we hear about the difficulties, but perhaps we're not privy to kind of see inside a kind of operation and see the kind of people behind the scenes who are like, pulling up every day, coming to work, working through these in such kind of times of uncertainty. So what's it been like for you to see that up close?
Let's say it's been a privilege to actually work alongside these people, and kind of, we did have to kind of pivot a little bit in terms of the direction that we were going in. We're a very forward-thinking organization. I think we were the first private organization in the UAE to appoint a chief AI officer. We're very focused in those areas and investments. But sometimes in this situation, you have to protect the investment as well. Effectively, we're a kind of a trading company as well, right? We're a portfolio trading company. So product is everything to us. Making sure that our customer base understands that we're here to support them as well. The work the logistics guys done is outstanding, absolutely outstanding. Completely changing kind of category strategies and plans on the groundwork that the logistics teams are actually doing, bringing product through different ports, land bridging it into the country and to fulfill customer needs. Is, as I say, it's a genuine privilege to see it, and that starts with the leadership in the country as well. Quite frankly, the calmness that they've displayed is unbelievable, really unbelievable.
You've obviously been in the industry for a number of years, has seen its evolution, seen how it's evolved into kind of the core business driver that procurement is today. This resilience that you speak of right now, do you think that will be the legacy of the modern procurement function when we look back at it kind of 5-10 years from now, or do you think it'll be something else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I probably shouldn't share this, but I kind of always said that my job is to destroy procurement, actually, is to make sure that we so intrinsically entrenched within the business that nobody no longer talks about procurement. I don't actually like the name very much, I have to say. It's kind of, we're business partners. So I would say the legacy that I would like is to be known as a valued partner. I think too long procurement's been seen as kind of a cost-cutting machine or a compliance hindrance or, an innovation vacuum as well. And I understand to a certain extent why that perception exists, but frankly, in some organisations, if that's all you see, then that's what you become as well. So that's not what procurement is about, as far as I'm concerned. For me, procurement's a challenger and it's an enabler, and it should sit at the intersection of every good business, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. As we kind of come to the end of our conversation, we've got time for a few more questions, and something we like to do on the podcast is get leaders speaking to one another. So our question from our last guest was, what's kind of one disaster which is kind of, or catastrophe that's kind of been burned into your brain, something you can't forget, and how has that kind of shaped your future and made sure that something like that kind of never happens again?
I would have asked exactly the same question, so that's it. That's interesting. But there's probably too many disasters, I would say. The one that really strikes back, and it's a long time ago. I was lucky to be involved in in a piece of procurement around aircraft. So procurement of some passenger jets, and I was doing the analytical work at the time, and I had my then boss looking over my shoulder, waiting for the numbers as they come through with bids for both Boeing and Airbus. And I unfortunately forgot the price of the engines on the piece. So we naturally then went back to the suppliers and gave them a hard time about the pricing, and then realised that we actually had some additional costs associated with it. And I think the one thing that I would say is, when you're dealing with billion dollars of spend, don't let your boss rush you. Would be learning that I took from that one.
It's a really good lesson to have. So thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned that would be the question you'd like to ask. So I'm more than happy to take that forward.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
I love hearing people's disasters.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, isn't it? Where we're so worried about the mistakes, but I think it's important that we hear from people who, mistakes are common in any organization at any stage. And guess what? We're still around. We're still, and those mistakes have taught us those lessons and made us into kind of better workers, better people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, perfect. Well, thank you for giving that question. Maybe it'll be a kind of trend where we kind of ask everyone that. That will be just a question that leaders pass to each other. Perfect. All right, Chris. We've got time for 3 more questions. Very quick fire. So these are just 3 questions I'm going to ask you, and I just want you to say the first thing that comes to mind. Okay. So, what's the most exciting thing about the future of procurement?
AI.
What is one thing people still get wrong about procurement?
It's a cost-cutting tool.
And finally, what is one piece of technology we rely on now which will be obsolete in the next 5 years?
Procure-to-pay tools.
Interesting. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's been fascinating to learn about you as a leader and what's kind of shaped you into the person you are today. And thank you for being so frank and honest with us. It's really appreciated. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. Lovely to speak to you.
And you. Thanks so much, Chris. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Procurement Magazine podcast. Be sure to tune in next week for another insightful episode. We'll see you then. And that's a wrap on this episode of Procurement Uncut, brought to you by BizClick, Procurement Magazine, and our sponsors at Amazon Business. Thanks for joining us as we strategize our way through the wild world of procurement. Before you go, don't forget we want to hear from you. got a sticky supplier issue, a negotiation nightmare, or maybe you have an incredible procurement story to share and want to appear on the show. Send us your burning questions or your speaker pitches, and you can easily drop us a line at procurementpodcast@bizclickmedia.com. Please remember to email from your business email address, as all eligible emails will be entered into a draw to win 2 free tickets to Procurement Live worth thousands. We'll be back next week to help you save more, source smarter, and maybe even get that promotion. Until then, keep those contracts tight and your value high. We'll see you next time.